and welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. I'm going to go ahead.
Amen.
Thank
Amen.
you. Thank you. And we're into this last little part. We aren't going to finish it today, but we are definitely getting that chapter that deals with the 10 generations between Adam and Noah. And in fact, we're talking here about Noah here. So let's take a look. So we're talking about Lemech, right? Lemech was the one who sired Noah. Vayikra et shmo Noach, he called his name Noah, Lemor, saying, Ze Yנחmenu, this one will provide comfort for us. Mima'asenu, from our work, Umeitzvon Yadenu, and for the toil of our hands, Min ha'adama, from the earth, Asher Era Ra Hashem, which the Lord has cursed. Okay, so Ze Yנחmenu. This one will give us comfort. Tanya. There's again, Tanya, of course, introduces an early source. Tzaddik ba'olam, when a righteous person comes into the world, tova ba'olam, goodness comes into the world. Beautiful statement, by the way. Shinemar, as it says, Ze Yenachamenu, this one will bring us comfort, Mima'asenu, from our toil, from our work, Umeitzvon Yadenu, and from the toil of our hands. Quote from Sanhedrin, page 113.2. So, here we go. Mivuar, it's clarified by Midrash Rabbah, in the Midrash Rabbah, Uva Perish Rashi, and in Rashi's explanation. Inyan ha'itzavon or itzvon min ha'adama. What are we talking about? We're talking about the grief from the soil. She'ad Noach, what we mean is She'ad Noach, that up until the time of Noach, Haita ha'aretz motzia kotzim udardarim, that they would possibly plant something and the earth would bring forth thorns and thistles. Ukishenolad Noah, nacha haaretz. But when Noah was born, the land was at ease. It didn't do that anymore. There is a statement somewhere that Noah actually invented the plow. And that raises some interesting issues because, of course, if God had cursed the land and we're told that it wouldn't yield its produce, etc., clearly the plow would contravene that curse. So it raises an interesting sort of theological issue here that if God has cursed it, do we have a right as human beings? Is it a just act on our part to limit that curse? And I think the idea is that it isn't that God wants to curse. It's just that the side of the divine, which is the just side, makes it necessary to bring about the accountability for human deeds, so that if a person is a tzaddik, comes into the world, or if people act in a righteous way, it then means that that divine level of justice and judgment can be reduced, and the divine level of compassion, which is the main attribute as we understand the divine to work, to shine forth. So, if anything, it's helping. It's helping
Could
the situation. Yes?
that's such a summary. Could you say that again?
Right. So, where do you want me to start?
Uh, the part about the divine presence being able to
Okay.
come in.
So we understand that God has a relationship with God's creation, that God has a relationship with this world, and that relationship is based on kindness and justice. And when human beings act in a just and kind way themselves, the divine spirit can be manifest fully. But when people do not act with kindness and justice, then the attribute of justice and judgment has to shine forth, which represents by the earth having to bring forth thorns and thistles. Okay. So when Noah, who was a righteous person, and the Torah actually says that, right? Mentions that he was a righteous person. The land did not have to do that anymore. There is a midrash, this isn't the midrash, that talks about Noah inventing the plow, okay, which would allow cultivation of the soil to be tremendously improved. So then I raised the issue of, if God had cursed the earth, then was Noah doing something right? And I was explaining that it's not because God wants to curse the earth. It is the nature. We know already that God placed his kindness and his mercy ahead of his judgment. But in fact, the righteous part of the person's righteousness, or the greatness of a righteous person, is that it allows the divine element of kindness to shine forth. So, okay, I'm going to go into the Torah Temimah here. Okay, so we mentioned the land was at ease when Noah came into the world. Umasha medayek Rashi, and the fact that Rashi makes a point, lahachriach si perusho bezeh Yנחmenu, right? That his explanation of the Yנחmenu, right? The im lav hachi, okay? In other words, he says, his name is Noah, right? And that it has to do with bringing the land at peace. In other words, nach or nacha haaretz, that his name Noah had to do with the fact that the land was at ease, right? That's the issue. And he's saying that the fact that Rashi explains this term Menachem, which Lemech says about Noah, right, as to what blessing he brings, which means to comfort us, right? The imlohachen, that if Rashi did not explain his name Noach in this way, that the land rested in that way, Menachem, he's saying it wouldn't have made sense for him to be called Noach. His name should have, if it was that he was bringing comfort in that direct kind of way to human beings, his name should be Menachem, not Noach. And the fact, or Nachem, right? His name could have been Nachem, but his name is Noach, which is a different root and has to do with being at rest. And what was at rest was the earth, in the way that it no longer brought forth the thorns and thistles. So, if Shalomar, but it is possible to say de omnam, however, omnam kain, who, that kavanat hakri'ah, that the intention of calling him Noach, right? Haita l'shem Menachem or Nachem. So even though his name is Noach, it could have been understood that it had to do with Menachem or Nachem. That even though he wasn't called Menachem or Nachem, that nevertheless, that still was the purpose, that he was bringing comfort as opposed to the land resting. He's saying that Rashi's argument, or the argument of the explanation in the Midrash Rabbah, isn't compelling. Achmatzinu b'shemot shehabaratam mitkatzeret, because we do find in terms of people's names, I believe that's what he's talking about, or names. Shemot could also simply mean nouns. Shehabaratam mitkatzeret, which are abbreviated, that are somehow abbreviated when they're pronounced, okay, or stated in this abbreviated kind of way. So in other words, we're saying that Noach, calling it, the fact that it's Noach in the Bible, isn't saying that that couldn't have been understood as Menachem. And as we go on with this, you'll understand better what we're saying. Here we go. V'kamo batikra et shmo Reuven. We have an example later on in Genesis where Leah calls Reuven Reuben, right? Why? And it says there in the Torah, Ki ra'ah Hashem be'oni. Do you see how the word Reuven becomes, in a sense, an acronym? Right, not quite an acronym, but the reason is Ki ra'ah, that is, the Re'u is the Lord has seen Be'oni. And it just says Ben, it doesn't say Be'oni, but that was the point of his name. So just like he's being called Noach, it could have been that it was Menachem in that sense. V'chein katuv Rashi b'Yoma, and so Rashi notes in Yoma, in the tractate Yoma, page 10a, the b'shemot, right, that when it comes to either names or nouns, heve gam ot achat shoresh, that even one letter can represent an entire root, bateva, in the word. And so, Matzinu beKiddushin Nun Vav Bet, we find in the tractate Kiddushin, page 56b, Darshu ha pasuk de Parshat Tetzei, that they explain the verse in the Parsha of Ki Tetzei. It's Pen Tikdash, I think is what it is, right? List. In other words, this has to do, it's a section, Deuteronomy 22:9, that's talking about planting a field with mixed seeds, right? And saying that pentikdash is what it's used, the expression there, and the translation of the new JPS translation is, it may not be used. In other words, it's hallowed, it's not for personal use. That when you do that, you no longer can take, you can, it's not that you've hallowed it in the normal sense of making it holy, but you've made it in a sense of being not fit for human consumption. That it's not right, that human beings may not make, certainly Jews may not then benefit from it. However, this pen tikdash, they explain as pen to kad aish. Do you see that? So this is a noun now that's being used in this, lest a fire break out and burn it. And they're taking this tikdash as pen to kad aish. Hare de darish ba'ot shin. In other words, they've interpreted simply the letter shin, right, tikdash, levado, by itself, l'shem eish. We understand that shin to refer to eish, the od kahena, and there are other examples of this as well. So Torah Temimah, Baruch Halevi Epstein, is simply bringing up an interesting point regarding this explanation that of the fact that he's not called Menachem, he's called Noach, and that's saying, well, that's why we're saying Nach Haaretz, but we don't have to. We don't have to. There are examples where Noach could stand for Menachem, right? Next. And this is now Shem, right? So Noah had Shem, Ham, and Japhet. That's what it's saying. So Lamed Bet, page, verse 32. Vahi Noach ben chamesh me'od shana. He was 500 years old. Vayoled Noach et Shem, et Ham, et Japhet. And Noah begat at Shem, Ham, and Japhet. That's what it's saying in that order. But there's a problem with this, which our rabbis are going to point out. Okay, again, it's in Sanhedrin, I believe. Okay, Sanhedrin, it's Ibid. So the previous reference was to Sanhedrin, page 69b. Et Shem v'Gomer. So Tanya, we again have this early source that says Shem katan shebekulam. Shem was actually the youngest of all of them. Shem katan bekulam aya. He was the youngest. Ela derech chochmatam chashiv laho. But what's happening is that the Torah is enumerating them according to their wisdom, right? That's how they're being, not according to their age, but according to their wisdom. And that's why Shem is mentioned first, because he was the wisest of the three. Teda, right? No. Dichtiv, how do we know that he was the youngest, that he wasn't the oldest? It says, Vahi Noach ben chamesh me'ot shana. It says Noah was 500 years old. Vayoled Noach et Shem et Cham ve'et Yafet. And Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Yafet. Kama Shem Gadol Mecham. So how much older? They weren't triplets, right? How much older was Shem? How much older would he have been than Cham? Shana, he would have been a year older. The Cham Gadol Miyefet Shana, and Cham would have been older than Shem. Excuse me, from Yefet by a year, right? In other words, there'd be a year's difference between these three sons. Nimtza, and in that case, we'd say Shem Gadol Meyefet. We'd have to say that Shem was older than Yefet, Shtei Shanim, by 2 years. Uchtiv, but then it goes on to say, and this again in Parshat Noach, the Noach ben shesh me'ot shana, it says elsewhere that Noah was 600 years, v'hamabul hayamayim al haaretz, that the waters of the flood came upon the earth. He was 600 years old, right? So how old should Shem have been at that point? He should have been 100 years old, right? And Cham would have been 101, and Yefet would have been 102. Uchtiv, but it also goes on to say, and this is the significant verse, Ve'ele toldot Shem, these are the generations of Shem. Shem ben me'ah shana, it says Shem was 100 years old, Vayoled et Arpachshad, when he begat Arpachshad, Shnatayim achar hamabul, 2 years after the flood. But if Shem was 100 at the flood, right, because Noah had him when he was 500, and the flood occurred when Noah was 600, Shem would have been 102, 2 years after the flood. V'chi ben me'ah shana, are we saying that he was me'at shana, that in fact he was 100 years old? V'halo bar me'ah utartein shnim haveh, but he must have been 102. Ela derech chochmatam chashiv lahu. So that's what's going on here, that the Torah is simply enumerating them in order of their wisdom, in order of their wisdom. So Shem was actually the youngest, because we already established that if Noah had the 3 sons starting at 500 years old, the one was at 500, the next one would have been a year later, and the third one would have been 2 years later. Well, we know that Shem was born 2 years later, so he must have been the youngest of all 3. Okay. Higher mathematics, what can I tell you? Let's take a look at the Torah Temimah. V'chein me'uvuar, and so it is clarified, Deshem haya katan miyefet, that he was younger than Yefet, lekaman, later on, the Parshat Noach, in the Parsha of Noach, of course we're in the Parsha of Bereshit, of Genesis, but in chapter 10, verse 21, U'Lashem yulad gam hu, Achi Yefet Hagadol, because there it introduces Shem's genealogy by saying, and to Shem there was also born to him the brother of Yefet the older. In other words, he was the brother of Yefet, his older brother. So there it also says Shem was younger than Yefet. So we now have a question. Why is this going into mathematics and arithmetic? Why didn't it just mention it from that verse? So he's not going to answer that right now. He says, we're going to get to it. You'll see why he chose not to derive what we just derived from that pasuk. The inyan hachokma yetera, and regarding the greater level of wisdom, shaita b'Shem, that Shem possessed, who al pi hamavora b'midrashim, it's based also on what is clarified in midrashim, shenolad mahu, that in fact he was born circumcised, v'sheyichet HaKadosh Baruch Hu et shmo alav, and that the Holy One, blessed be He, I guess he concentrated his name on him, on him. In other words, that he had a certain higher level of apprehension of the divine. Dichtiv, because it says Rosh Perek Toldot at the beginning of Parshat Toldot, Vayomer Hashem La. We're talking now about Rebecca, that God said to Rebecca, V'darshinan al yedei Shem, that in fact it was by means of Shem that this information was given to her. So what happened was, remember that Rebecca had twins, they were struggling within her, and she was told, she was given this prophecy about the twins, and that prophecy was, according to tradition, given to her by means of Shem. So Shem was a prophet. He had a high level of the divine spirit. Ushe Avraham, not only that, Abraham, Atid Latzet Mimenu. We know that Shem was the forebear of Abraham. Abraham finally, he came down from Shem. Veshimesh Bekuna Gedola, and not only that, Shem also was the high priest of the time, Kidichtiv, let's see, because it's written concerning him. Vahu Kohen Le'el Elyon, we're here talking about Melchizedek. He was the priest of the Lord on high. Ubeit HaMikdash nivna betchumo, and we also know that the temple was built in his area, in the area of Shem. Remember, it also represents, the three sons represent Europe, Asia, and Africa, right? And the temple was built in Asia, which was the part for Shem. Yefet would have been Europe, and Ham would have been Africa. Betchumo, Kedichtiv, as it says, Vayishkon bo'hole Shem. It says he shall dwell in the tents of Shem. When that the tent of Shem is a reference to the temple. V'hechazek yeshivot, he maintained yeshivot, schools, right, to study Torah. V'hirbitz Torah, and he also spread Torah. He taught Torah, Ladat et darchei Hashem, for people to know the ways of the Lord, umitzvotav, and his commandments. And he gives a reference to the Rambam, chapter 4, Me'avodat Kochavim, and this is in his Mishnah Torah, in Maimonides' Mishnah Torah. Well, we're not finished. There's some need to investigate a little further. To me'idach gisa, that on this, if this is all true, in other words, that Shem was this high priest and he had this higher measure of divine presence, etc., yesh ra'aya, okay, lichora, that there seems to be, this would sort of be a proof, serve as a proof, apparently, the Shem hayagadol b'shanim mi'efet, that in fact Shem was older than Yefet. But hu lefi why? Hu lefi ma de'ita b'kama makomot. It's based on what is stated in several places. Shaya Kohen, that Shem was a priest. Let's see. Kamosha katavnu, or katav, and just as is stated, the Parshat Lech, in the Parsha of Lech Lecha, Vahu Kohen, etc., where it says, and he was a Kohen, the El Elyon. We quoted that passage, and we are claiming that Melchizedek and Shem are identical. The Ita Bezavachim, and we have in the Tractate Zavachim, page 112b, Ad shelo, this is the statement, Ad shelohu kama mishkan, until the Mishkan, right, that portable tabernacle that the Israelites carried around with them in the wilderness, up until that point where that was raised, that was put up, Haita avodah shel kohanim, that the work of the priests, the bechorim, was with the firstborn. And of course, we're saying that Shem was a Kohen, etc. So maybe he was the firstborn then. The Imkain, and if this is the case, Halo Haya Bechor, right? He would have been the firstborn. But Ulai, however, Mipnei Rov Malotav, maybe it was because of his many good qualities, Sha'ayubo, that he possessed, Kamosha Katavnu, just as we wrote, all these good qualities he had. Hichriya et Yachas HaBechorah Shel Achiv, he was able to, he was worthy, right? They kind of changed this kind of order, Veshimesh Hu, and they said, well, look, you really deserve to be Kohen Gadol because of your character and what you're doing and your commitment, etc. So yes, please forgive me for what I'm about to say. Circumstances alter cases, right? The case is that the firstborn gets to be the Kohen, and you're not the firstborn, but on the other hand, you are acting in, as the poster child for the Kohen Gadol. That's what we think you should be doing. Okay, so onwards. So he says this really does require further investigation. But there's another issue that we need to clarify. The fact that Cham is mentioned before Yefet, right? It says Shem, Cham, Yefet. Because if we're holding on to the idea that they are being listed, right, according to their wisdom, Chashiv loho, that they're being counted. Halo hayacham garua mikulam. Certainly Cham was the least wise of all three, right? He's the one who got himself into trouble after the flood. Kemivu'ah sof Parsha Noach, as we see at the end of Parsha Noach. Ulai hiktim. So let's suggest that it's possible that the reason why he comes before Yefet, but Ulai hiktim rak et Shem lekulam. But maybe, in fact, in this list, the only reason that we put Shem first, right, as opposed to the other two. In other words, we're saying we're listing this according to their wisdom, and Shem was the wisest, but we're not holding tight to that with regards to the rest of the list, we're not so punctilious, because Chochmato, a kind of Shem's wisdom, Hamuflaga which was absolutely amazing. He had this incredible character, and that's why we put him first. But Yefet wasn't like he was so much better than Cham, right? So much better. Lagabe Cham, in reference to Cham. Lo hayta dai. So we're saying, yes, he was better, but not so much better. Shem was just a really exceptional individual, and Yefet's relationship to Cham was, yes, he was a better person, he was wiser, but not that much wiser. Ad shetachriya ma'alat ha'bechora shel Cham, right? In other words, to the degree that Cham's position, who was really born first, okay, that they should make Cham second to Yefet, that we wouldn't want to go in that direction for that. And with that, I will stop the share, and we will, God willing, continue with this next time if we're in Genesis. So just gonna mark the page. Okay, here we go for next time. Any comments?
I was wondering why Noah's name wasn't changed to Menachem, whatever.
Nachem. He's okay. He was saying, okay, the point that Baruch Halevi Epstein was making was that there are examples where names are given which really stand for other, for longer words.
Yeah, but Jacob was named to Israel. He was changed.
Yeah, but that was changed altogether. But there was that was an act that had to do with his future. Remember, we're saying that Noach from the get-go was bringing comfort to, to the people. So they changed Jacob's name because Jacob's, as it were, his karma was going to, forgive my blending things, but in a sense, we were saying that Jacob's karma was changed from the kind of personality he had when he cheated his brother to what he wound up being.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Was the youngest there of the sons Was he? Was a priest?
Shem? You talking about Shem?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Was he a priest and what I mean is, and there was a temple there at the time?
I don't know. There might have been some place of worship, but the temple remember he refers to the Mishkan. Yeah, I mean they must have had some kind of altar. They may well have had some kind.
Well, they weren't. We didn't have the Jewish people then.
No, we did not. The Jewish people.
Did people pray in that temple to God?
People would have prayed in that temple to God. Yes, they would have. But it was only after Abraham that we start to develop the Jewish people.
Oh, I see.
But in some ways, what you're bringing out is that the Torah and our interpretation of the Torah allows for righteous individuals who are not, let's say, Israelites.
I was wondering why God didn't save the righteous people when he destroyed the earth with water. There was a lot of righteous people there.
No, apparently they weren't. Shem
weren't?
After Noah, there were not a lot of righteous people. There was only Noah and his family. That was it.
Oh,
Shem was around afterwards, and Shem was one of the people who survived. Shem, Ham, and Japeth and their wives, right, were all all saved from the flood.
Yeah, the three sons were also, and their children,
and their wives. I don't know if they had any children at that point. So, yeah. Anyway.
Wow.
Okay.
It's unusual that nobody in the whole world wasn't righteous. There was no righteous ones.
It is pretty amazing. Yes.
It's just like the Noah and where Abraham says, "Well, if there's 50 people."
I know.
10 people somewhere.
That's right. There weren't even 2 people in the city. There weren't
My
even.
Goodness, that's terrible.
It is terrible. Well, we've seen some times where the issue of wickedness is sadly a major issue.
It's happening today.
Well, we wonder. Yes. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.